Welcome to the PFP podcast from the Personal Finance Society, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of financial planning and beyond. I'm Luke Holloway, editor of Personal Finance Professional magazine. In this episode, we're joined by Eddie Grant, Disability and Access Ambassador for Insurance. Eddie is a non-executive director and past president of the Personal Finance Society. He is also a member of the Chartered Insurance Institute's Professional Standards Committee, vice president of the Insurance Institute of London, and a board member of the European Financial Planning Association. We're also joined by Kate Headley, co-founder and CEO of The Clear Company, a leading culture, diversity and inclusion consultancy. Kate was appointed Disability and Access Ambassador for Recruitment in 2022 and is a leading voice in helping organisations create more inclusive workplaces. Today, we'll discuss the progress being made towards greater disability inclusion across UK workplaces. We'll explore the role of the Disability and Access Ambassadors, the impact of the Keep Britain Working Review, as well as what organisations can do to move beyond compliance and create genuinely inclusive cultures, and how sectors such as financial planning and insurance can play a leading role in improving outcomes for disabled people. But before we get into the episode, a quick note that we want to hear from you, our listeners. What questions would you like answered, and what would you like to hear more about? You can email us at podcasts@thepfs.org. That's podcasts plural @thepfs.org. Now, here's my conversation with Eddie and Kate. Hello, Eddie, and hello, Kate, and thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today. Hello.
Hello, our pleasure. Well, my pleasure. I can't speak for you, Eddie.
There's plenty for us to talk about today. It's really exciting to have you both here to talk about disability and access to insurance and financial services. So, we're really, really keen to get your thoughts. So thanks for being with us. So, Eddie, you were appointed to the role of Disability and Access Ambassador in 2025. Can you explain what that role is and how it impacts on different sectors?
Absolutely. So the government have identified 20 different sectors where they've asked leaders in those sectors to help increase awareness around disability, but most importantly, enhance accessibility itself. So I look after the insurance and financial planning sector, and Kate is or was the recruitment sector. And in essence, with the role, what's really good is the way that we've been able to bring sectors together and to amplify things that already exist and to build better, so input into new initiatives. But most importantly, I think this is, and this is a really good example, is to collaborate. I'd never met Kate before. I've now got loads of ambassadors I'm working with cross-sector, and it's really great to see there's some fantastic ideas in other sectors, and bring those into our world, and the great stuff we're doing, share that with other sectors as well.
Incredible. So it's a really key way for different sectors to, as you say, to collaborate. And Kate, as Eddie's mentioned there, you were appointed to the role in terms of recruitment in 2022 and have achieved a great deal since then. So can you tell us about your role and also kind of what you were proud of and what you were involved with in terms of your tenure?
Yeah, of course. So I did an extra year, so I did 4 years. What it meant to me being appointed as Disability and Access Ambassador was, first of all, great pride to be selected by Cabinet Office, appointed by number 10. What that also gave me was increased credibility to do the work that I've been working on probably for the last decade and a half. I have a self-mission, which is to create a disability-confident recruitment sector. I've worked in the sector for over 30 years. I know lots of amazing people in the sector. And along with the Disability and Access Ambassador's remit, what I wanted to do was to enhance that sector's ability to close the employment gap for disabled people. It's a £40 billion sector. It's moving hundreds of thousands of people every day. So if you can tap into that and make a difference, you're influencing lives every day. And that's what we set out to do. So what I've achieved, I'm not on my own. I want to make that really clear. As with Eddie, the other Disability and Access Ambassadors have been phenomenally supportive, specifically people like Hector Minter at Microsoft, and various others. I don't want to name them all because I'll forget one and that'll be horrendous. But we've all banded together to help it work. So I run something called the Recruitment Industry Disability Initiative, which I founded in 2010 and was gathering momentum anyway. The additional momentum over the last 4 years means that we've run awards, we've recognised great practice, which I'll come on to talk about shortly, and we've calculated that we're influencing the lives of about 2.1 million people every year, either as allies or as disabled people seeking employment. And the greatest thing for me is at the end of my tenure in the House of Lords last year, with the Minister supporting hugely and the other DAA supporting hugely, I had a room rammed full of recruitment industry leaders and people who had successfully navigated their career through the recruitment industry. And 10 years earlier, I was almost paying people to turn up. So that to me is a real achievement. Additionally, as the DAA has given me extra influence on technology. So although I am a Luddite, as I explained to Eddie, I'm a great believer in technology reaching more people. So I've supported a product called Clear Talents, which is around access for all to reasonable adjustments. I've got a case study around that for you from Network Rail later as well. And the Minister's highlighted that as one of my achievements, as something that can support access to work, making more people have access to adjustments, which is critical for people in disability in employment. And then on top of, there's lots of other stuff, but I mean, I'm particularly proud of Disability Confident module that I've developed with HS2 and HS2 Supply Chain. And what we're setting out to achieve there is that all apprentices, we hope, will be required to a complete Disability Confident module as part of their basic training, so that we create a cohort, almost a tidal wave is the idea, of people coming into organisations, into their careers as disability confident people, naturally allies or confident around their disability. There's lots more, but I've probably taken up too much time already.
Not at all.
Which I will do.
No,
Do shut me up if you need to.
No, plenty of time to speak about that, because it just sounds like so much progress has been made in that short time alone, and it's great to hear that positive kind of practical impact that is being really had on new careers of disabled people in sectors.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm really proud of, or recognise, is 10 years ago, we did a survey across the recruitment industry asking how many people in recruitment knew what the term reasonable adjustments meant. And everybody did. They thought it meant changing the time of an interview. So when you probe deeper, less than 13% of candidates were being offered adjustments at any one time. Adjustments, either workplace adjustments or reasonable adjustments, is common parlance now in the recruitment sector. It's completely changed, which means it's much more accessible for candidates. There's far more to do. But that I think is a significant change. Michael Page, for example, provided adjustments at work for every single colleague globally, which is just, you wouldn't have heard of that 5-10 years ago. So that's a significant impact.
Incredible. That's fantastic to hear. And Eddie, we're now approaching almost your first year anniversary in the role. So how do you feel that's gone so far? And looking forward, what kind of support are you hoping for from the insurance and financial services profession and the leaders within it?
Well, it's certainly been busy. I think that's been the first thing, and the opportunity to meet great people like Kate and the other ambassadors has been a real insight into the world of disability, and also access to learn from those other sectors. And if you think about retail sector as a really good example, they have everyone coming in. They have to accommodate all accessibility needs, whether that be someone in a wheelchair or someone with a pram or someone with a trolley delivering stuff. They have to think about accessibility. And so actually it's really important to take those learnings and bring them into our sector. In my first year, what I've really wanted to do was to amplify what's already been started. One of the things I think happens quite a lot is everyone rushes off to the next shiny thing and never embeds what's already there. And so I'm really keen to amplify the great work that Johnny Timpson and Peter Hamilton have done in our sector, to continue that, amplify it. And for example, the Find Insurance service, which is a really great service. When someone gets declined or can't find insurance, then the BIBA service finds a specialist broker to enable them to access insurance. That's really, really positive for disabled people in particular, because it gets them to the right people who can help them. The other thing I want to do, and I've been involved in developing new initiatives, but sitting in the room with a disability access lens on it. So I've been trying to get in the room to make sure that we do that. But I think what Kate's doing in terms of recruitment and culture is really important. You need to get disabled people into the room when things are being designed so that they can influence the design. Because the problem I think there is with reasonable adjustments is it's a failure. When you have to do a reasonable adjustment, it's because you haven't designed it properly in the first place. And therefore, let's get the right people in the room to start with.
So it's clear that ambassador role is so important in affecting change and improving access for disabled people, isn't it? I mean, what are your thoughts on how important that is to have these ambassadors, have that collaboration, and the difference it's clearly making already, Kate?
Yeah, I think it's phenomenally important, and it's a really great program of people. One of the things that if I'm honest, when I first started working at government level, which is a good 10 years ago plus now, the gap was always about employer engagement. So I think in having a program of work with people who are employed in their sectors and can engage with employers in their sectors was a really clever step, because actually, as we're going to talk about the Charlie Maynard review and the Keep Britain Working, employers hold all the cards in this space. So actually, I think what the ambassadors do is link employers with government policy. We're able to influence up. Possibly not as much as we would like to, but I think I've seen a change over the last 4 years in terms of our influence and level of trust and access. But also that we can bring things back to the employers. So we're going to talk about dispelling myths. And I think one of the things that the Disability and Access Ambassadors all do is create positivity around disability. So go out there and talk about the opportunities, the positive change that we can make to people's lives, the positive impact disabled people can have in our organisations and in our different sectors. And I think the ambassadorial role allows us to champion that collectively. So like Eddie, what I've really benefited from is learning how to do that in different sectors. I mean, as a culture consultant, I'm working across many sectors anyway. But, I had this day, I actually videoed it, which was very unlike me. But I was in the DWP. I went straight from there to the Globe Theatre for a lovely dinner with my DAA, Disability and Access Ambassador colleagues. And then the next day I was at HS2 championing the Disability Confident module that we're doing as part of my DAA role with the recruitment sector, and then the next day you're at Lloyd's of London and so on and so forth. And that's all made possible by the Disability and Access Ambassador's role to an extent. But I think what the individuals appointed to the DAA roles do is make that possible for government, because we are chosen because of our opportunity and our ability to influence our own sector and across broader sectors, because it's an influence role. So we want to make change happen. We all want to write new policies, but actually that's not what this is about. What this role is about is influencing systemic change. And I think that's what is one of the greatest benefits of the programme.
And Kate, when we talk about the mindset that organisations have around disability and accessibility, how do you feel you can kind of persuade organisations and firms to move from more of a compliance mindset to almost a cultural change mindset? Is that difficult to do, and how can we go about it?
Well, I don't find it difficult to do, but that's probably because people will work with me and my organisation because that's what they want to do. But I'm regularly asked, what are the enablers in this space? And this sounds very simple and simplistic view, but the biggest enabler in disability inclusion generally, and in having a positive culture, is authenticity. That's the absolute key. You need leaders in the organisation who genuinely want to have a disability inclusive organisation and to get it right, and whatever those lessons might be that they need to learn. So they need to be open to know what they don't know. And to Eddie's point, I regularly work with organisations who see themselves as kind, borderline paternalistic, they're nice places to work. The warning bells are, long-serving employees, very low turnover, no new people coming through. And, when difference comes in, it goes out really quickly. And actually, what I find works with organisations. Particularly, I work quite a lot in C-suites, and if you say to executives around a room, we need to understand fundamentally that being nice isn't necessarily being inclusive, because we're using our own life experiences, our own parameters, our own paradigms, if you like, to understand what being nice to somebody might feel like. So somebody being nice to me, to personalise it for a moment, if I may, I'm severely visually impaired. And I went into an executive meeting and asked if I could record it on my iPhone because I'm visually impaired and I can't take notes. And from this executive who'd been introduced to this global consultant, said, "Oh, bless dear, when did that happen?" I lost all my credibility instantly. And this individual, in their view, was being kind and nice and doing the right thing in the moment. So in terms of persuading people, I think it's about holding up the mirror a little bit in terms of, to Eddie's point, people generally, their intentions are absolutely great. We all know that, like me, I was in my 50s when I started to lose my sight. So at some point, we're either going to die young or we'll become disabled. So it's a fact of life. And that we need to not be frightened of it, but to understand it better. And that's what the Disability Confident module is all about. So when I'm persuading is quite a strong word. I read that on the script and thought that's quite a strong word. I think it's more about encouraging and empowering organisations to do what they'd like to do, but are finding incredibly difficult. And that the key to unlocking it all is not look at a set of initiatives. I've got some great examples. I'll give you great things that people have done. But overall, culturally, we have to understand difference. We have to be open to having questions. We have to have a confident, safe culture where it's okay for, Eddie to say to me, "Are you okay with those wires?" and not feel, am I saying the wrong thing? We have to create that culture. So normally when I'm talking about disability confidence with employers, it's about creating a culture of inclusion for disabled people, which makes it a culture of inclusion for all colleagues, and everybody gains. Everybody gains. There's lots more I could tell, but it takes a day. So hopefully that's a bit of a start.
Absolutely. And Eddie, would you agree how important that overall culture is for everyone? And as Kate mentioned there, to feel comfortable and be open, that's really key, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to touch on the Mayfield review. But actually, the one thing that review has highlighted is you're only as good as your line manager, and how your line manager helps you, works with you, tackles the difficult conversations, and encourages you to actually utilize the things that your company is offering or encouraging your company to offer more. And it is that line manager that can unlock potential for people, whether they're disabled or not disabled. It doesn't matter. And often what happens is great people get promoted to become managers without any training to be the manager, and that's where we need to get better. We need to get better at helping managers manage and giving them the support to do so, and also the authority and the right mindset to help disabled people.
And we've mentioned that you're both involved in the Keep Britain Working government review, which is now in the vanguard stage. Eddie, can you tell us more about what that review is, what it's aiming to do, and its relevance to disabled people?
Yeah, so Charlie Mayfield, who was the chief exec of John Lewis, previous chairman of John Lewis, was asked by the government to do a review looking at employment in the UK, and the fact that there's issues around productivity, and most importantly, just the number of people that drift out of employment, and in particular due to disability, because a very high proportion of people will get a disability during their working life. I think the percentage is about 83%, something like that. High. So it's ridiculously high. Yes. And therefore, what the company can do to retain that person is absolutely critical. And just as an aside, what our sector can do, the insurance sector, in particular the group risk sector, is phenomenal, because we, with our permanent health insurance group risk, we actually help people rehabilitate, get back into work. It's a phenomenal asset to have in your business. But most importantly, it's a life changer because it keeps people in work. So that's what the review is essentially doing. It's highlighted what the issues are, and now what it's trying to do is look at how we tackle those particular issues. And both Kate and myself have been involved in different groups, and they've got, I think it's now nearly 200 companies who are the Vanguard companies, but also they've got experts involved as well who are coming in to help the Vanguard companies and create a template for UK business to retain people in work, whether it's due to disability or not, but it's to make sure our workforce becomes more productive.
And one thing you touched on briefly earlier, you said that this review will also help dispel any myths around disability and access for companies. Can you tell us more about how that will happen, hopefully?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different levels for that, but the main thing is that it's dispelling this myth that disability means long-term sick. And what we're trying to do is reprogram the thinking in employers of disability doesn't mean long-term sick. In fact, statistically, disabled people take less time off sick than their non-disabled colleagues. That's a statistic that's been around for a long time, published by the HSE, and is still the case. So what the aim of this review is to dispel that myth around disability health, meaning time off sick and sickness, because they don't. So, for example, I have systemic lupus and I work globally. I don't take time off sick. I make adjustments to make me work. And that's the difference with employers of looking at the productivity and the opportunity of things like flexible working, of things like open trust culture, good performance management and accountability. It means that we dispel that myth that actually taking a disabled person into your workplace means you're taking somebody fundamentally broken. I've heard that word. And so what this review and this next stage needs to do is say, that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is great wealth of talent that you need in your organisations. Your talent pools are empty. Your talent acquisition people are tearing the hair out. Why are we not looking more broadly for the sake of a small adjustment? So I think that's the key myth I would talk about.
That's excellent to hear, and we'll certainly speak more about those events that are coming up later in the year as well, which we fully encourage all our members to engage with. Kate, most employers will be very familiar with gender pay gap reporting. So could we soon see disability pay gap reporting becoming more of a requirement for firms, and what kind of companies will that impact, and indeed how can companies kind of begin to prepare for that if it is to come in?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that. I think, yes, we can expect disability pay gap pay gap reporting, and race equality pay gap reporting as well. And I think that's right. I think it's more complex with disability pay gap reporting because pay gap reporting depends on something very important, which is data. So if you're going to report on pay gaps, you need to know where your disabled people are in order to know what they're earning and where the pay gaps are, to do all that mathematic stuff that I don't really understand, but gives us the figures that we then work on culturally. The biggest challenge employers have got at the moment is knowing who their disabled people are. And it's bigger than that, actually, because we've also got lots of people who technically, according to the Equality Act, are disabled and have the right to say, I am a disabled person, and that's how I would classify myself as disabled. But they don't want to, because the world's changed. So also the kind of the stigma, if you like, of disability means that, I know young people, for example, with lifelong conditions who make their adjustments and would not classify themselves as disabled, would never tick that box, particularly not if that means I'm accelerated through to an interview because I want to get an interview on my own merits. So I think the biggest challenge for employers is, yes, any employer with more than 250 employees will have to do pay gap reporting. I think that's pretty certain. And how do they prepare for that? They prepare for that doing all the stuff we've talked about already. It's all about culture. So what you need is an organisation where everybody doesn't have to stick their hand up and go, hi, I'm one of the disabled ones, so could I have that form, please? The trick is to get adjustment profiles and knowledge of every colleague that you've got in your organisation. So don't single out your disabled people, ask everybody. Life circumstances, caring responsibilities, volunteering responsibilities, looking after your neighbour, whatever it might be that impacts on your work, get that profiling done. So if we look at, and I've got a figure here, so Network Rail, for example, have introduced, it happens to be Clear Talents, but they've put in this platform, digital platform, offering every single colleague, and that's a complex organisation. And they've been doing this for about 18 months now. So they offer every single colleague adjustments. So from not knowing where the disabled people were, I'll have to read the figures because I can't remember them. That's how my cognitive processing doesn't work. They've got now, they've gone from 4% disclosure rates to 8.9 in a year. Completed adjustments, 1,094 a year ago, 4,422 in the current year. So everything's changed. Average days to complete an adjustment have dropped from 363 to 75. These are the things that organisations need to put in place, because then their disabled colleagues won't be thinking, I need to put my hand in my ear and say I'm disabled because you need the stats. It'll be, I need to complete my profile, whatever that is, adjustment passport, whatever people use. Channel 4 have got something similar, whatever it is that people use. We need to know who our disabled people are, and they need to feel confident enough to say, I need an adjustment. And I think part of the pay gap reporting that we will need to look at, and we're doing as part of the Charlie Mayfield Vanguard working, is, do we look at adjustment requests as opposed to numbers of disabled people? Is that a different way of measuring these pay gaps and measuring what our employers or our employees are? So that's absolutely key, is you need to know who your disabled people are. And that's not just about asking them. It's about creating trust, not singling them out, and making sure we've got an environment that genuinely makes everybody feel this is great. And that comes back, Luke, to that authenticity I talked about earlier. So I know you're going to ask me about some examples later, but if you look at some of the examples which I'm going to share, they're all about organisations who can genuinely say, hi, we've listened to our disabled people. They've helped inform our policies. They've helped inform our building design. They've helped inform the way that we communicate with each other. They've helped inform our working patterns. So we genuinely are not just saying we're disability confident. You've got a voice here. We'll listen to it and we will act on it. And that's when suddenly you realise, I now know who my disabled colleagues are. So when I have to report on it, I've got the data. But you need to start now. This doesn't happen overnight. Culture change is a long-term thing.
Absolutely. Eddie, it sounds like that could be such a key requirement of firms, but as Case described there, how it's approached is really important, and they need the time to kind of gather that data, but in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing, if you flip it around, it's about a way of retaining your team, because if you are looking after them and you are asking them for this information in a way that they feel, well, actually there's a benefit to asking, because one, you're going to do something with it. If you're then getting all of these adjustments for people, then they can see where I've shared some information which is, quite sensitive information, and there was a win for me and a win for my company, and actually making life easier for the individual. The other thing I think is really important is there are, what I've identified is there's so many companies and organizations that are willing to share their experiences. So RNIB, for example, we've got a fantastic new office near Euston Station, will sort of show people, the office, how it's been designed. I know the Insurance Institute of London went to do a visit recently, and I know when the CI moved into this building, time was taken to think about how do you make this building accessible for not only the team but also visitors as well. That all you have to do is look up. All you have to do is look up and ask people and talk to people, and it's amazing how willing they are to share when it comes to accessibility. And people don't feel threatened sharing that information, and I think that's a really positive thing.
Fantastic, and they're just some incredible examples, aren't they, Eddie, of changes that are being made. Almost, we've gone from a kind of daily, kind of small gesture, almost on a practical basis, to a kind of recruitment process, a wider reaching idea, and all along the way, it's engaging with disabled people along with that, isn't it? Which is so important.
Yes, and the other thing, the viewers and listeners to this podcast should also consider is their clients, because as well as asking your employees, if you ask your clients, and the FCA have done an awful lot of work on vulnerability, if you ask your clients about what would make their experience better, then actually, and focusing on that, then actually that would make a wild difference, and also open up new markets. Because if your building is not accessible, but there's things you can do to make your building accessible, then you'll get a different group of clients coming into that. I've seen advisors who have had videos where they do a tour of the office, what it would like when you arrive. We don't have any steps. We have wide doors, and they take them through all the building, showing what it would be like. I've seen it also done with recruitment, where they say, this is what's going to happen when you come for an interview, and this is the process. So actually, it's that dispelling of myths that really helps people. One of my sort of biggest observations about the recruitment sector is they have a very lovely paragraph, which is lovely and legal, that says that they they recruit ethically, and just ask, and we'll give you that reasonable adjustment. But there are some companies that will showcase what that means,
And that's what works.
and that then gives the confidence to apply for that job. And it's that. It's one thing saying I'm going to be a great employer, but it's another thing to showcase, and with those examples that you've given.
It's a really good. I'm really glad you raised that, Eddie, actually, because there is quite a lot of research that suggests that seeing what I call a strap line on the bottom of an advertisement is actually a deterrent rather than an engagement factor, because what people then look for is, so to tell me what you're doing. And if all you're saying is we are an equal opportunities employer, we welcome applications from, then that's not telling me anything about what you're doing and why it would be right for me. So if you're going to make a statement that's around compliance, then the authenticity has to support it, as Eddie quite rightly says. There is a horrendous example of that in the past, but you probably don't want me to.
I think we should hear about that.
It was
Yeah.
on the news. It was all over the press. I used to use
Yeah.
it in training. So it's actually the hospital that looks after my site, and they are wonderful. Amazing hospital. But Liverpool University Hospital Trust posted an advert out, and on the bottom of it, it said, and all that rubbish about equal opportunities. Because what had actually happened in the office was somebody said, don't forget to put all that rubbish about equal opportunities on the bottom of the ad, and off it went to the press. So lots of learning there about authenticity as opposed to compliance, I think.
Absolutely, and you've made it really important there about that firms and organisations need to showcase this. It's not about putting the onus on anyone who may be disabled to, come and tell us about your disability and we'll work with you. It shouldn't be on the disabled person, shouldn't it? Firms should showcase positively what they can do and what they are doing.
It's not easy either to do that. So I'm partially sighted, as I've mentioned, and I didn't lose my sight until I was about 50. And I got a white stick given by the local council and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't use it for 5 years because I didn't want my sight loss it suddenly became an identifier for me. Like whenever I went out, even to the local pub in the village, how's your sight? So suddenly I'd gone from this mother, wife, well-traveled consultant to how's your sight? And I just didn't want that to be my definition. So I found it really hard to talk about it, and I hid it hugely. And lots of disabled people mask brilliantly. They're very clever at that. And and legally, actually, the onus is on the employer to create an environment of trust and prove they've done it. So just asking the question, have you got a disability? And the person says no. That's not enough. You have to prove you've created an environment of trust, or they can still say, I was discriminated against on the basis of my disability. So legally, compliant-wise, you need to get it right. But you're absolutely right to raise that, Luke. It's not easy. And why should a disabled candidate or disabled employee have more personal self-confidence than somebody who's non-disabled and be able to talk about themselves? When actually that's counterintuitive, if that's the right word, because from neurodivergent perspective, mental health perspective, actually cultural perspective, some people find it very difficult to talk about themselves. So it's a big ask. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. And continuing with how organisations approach this, Eddie, do you think UK businesses understand the commercial value of accessible customer experience, or is that actually still seen as a cost, do you think, for some businesses that aren't understanding that? Right.
Well, I think some organisations have absolutely realised when you look at the purple pound and the potential market that you're unlocking, and one example that I unearthed this year was around the Paralympics and the athletes in there, and I was talking to one of the Paralympians, and she was explaining sort of the whole issue around travel insurance. And actually, if you can't get travel insurance, you can't train. You can't train, you can't become a Paralympian. So actually, you only get the group policy when you get on the Paralympian team. But getting there, you have to pretty much self-fund your way through it. And if you can't get insurance, it makes life very complicated. And she was explaining that actually she had real problems getting travel insurance. And then she unearthed a company that specialized in her condition. And not only that, the underwriting process was very empathetic. And so therefore, she's built a relationship up with that company. That company has got a really loyal customer. And not only that, they have got a champion for their business as well, because she's going around telling everyone how great it is, but in particular how empathetic the underwriting is. I then went on to speak to the firm itself and the person who set it up and the underwriting team. And the point they said is actually when you have a disabled person, they know their condition.
Yeah.
That
Well,
they manage it. So actually, from a insurance risk point of view, isn't it better to have a customer that really understands the condition they've got and is managing it, which obviously will reduce the risk of there being a problem, than someone who doesn't manage it, doesn't know they've got the condition, and is more likely to have an issue medically because they either don't know about it or they're not managing it. So actually, from a risk point of view, this company was saying that they think that the risk is a really good risk. And so actually, when they start the relationship, they start with single event travel insurance, and actually get to a point where they're quite happy to offer renewable annual policies because they get so confident that this individual knows what they're doing. And that's just one example of the potential for our sector when it comes to disabled people. And if I look at the banking sector, they've done an awful lot of work, and Catherine Townsend in particular, who was the previous ambassador, she's done an awful lot of work with people who've got hearing loss. And the point she's saying is in banking, actually, as clients get older, similar to financial planning, as clients get older, the one thing that often goes is their hearing. And actually, if you don't accommodate that, then you're actually going to find it difficult for those customers to deal with you. So the people you want to retain who are losing their hearing, if you don't find solutions to those difficulties, then actually what will happen is they'll drift off as customers. They'll disengage because they can't. Your service is not one that works for them. Banking have realised that. One of the things I'm trying to do is to showcase that to our sector, so that actually we don't lose those customers going forward.
Yes, those commercial benefits are obviously very clear to see as well. So something that is important to communicate. And Kate, when it comes to organisations measuring disability confidence, how can that be done in a way that's meaningful rather than, as we kind of touched on earlier, performative? How can that be done, do you think, for organisations?
yeah, I mean, it builds on what we've already talked about, which is we want to hear the voices of the disabled people and we want to know how they feel, how included they feel. So culture surveys, pulse surveys, focus groups, talking to disabled people is an absolute clear measure of how included people feel or do not feel. Also, another thing to measure is the levels of disclosure. So, how many people tell you. So, I mean, in recruitment industry is slightly different to other industries. I don't know insurance. Well, I do know insurance actually because I work in it as well. But where you'll have organisations say, the thing is, it's not much of an issue for us because we don't get many disabled people working here or as candidates. Over 25% of the population has a disclosable disability, adult working age population. So I think you probably have got a few, even if you don't know about it. So I think another really core measure is how many people are telling you they have a disability. And to Eddie's point earlier, a way to get that out is having those focus groups, having those lunch and learn sessions. People start to share when they find themselves in safe environments. So measuring that, I think, is really key. There's the classic things of normal, numbers of tribunals, etc. But that's a negative one. I'd like employers to look at their performance reviews, how many, in terms of levels of disability confidence. I'd like organisations to be telling me what they're doing when they have a performance issue to ensure that that's not disability related, that there is an adjustment that can be put in place. You regularly get somebody who's neurodivergent, for example, will start a job, start to underperform, leave, and at the point of leaving say, yeah, I'm severely dyslexic, I just didn't like to mention it, and some small things could have been put in place. So all of that. And then the other key measure, as I've said before, is adjustments for everyone and how many people are taking you up on that. You can really seriously test the pulse of your organisation if you know who your people are. My mum used to work in community care decades ago, and she always said this phrase, which I grew up on, which was behind every closed door. And I always say to employers, behind every employee, you don't know what's happened to them that morning, what's happened on the way in, what's happening in their lives, and you need to know. So for an organisation's health check, I'd want to know that they knew their employees and that they'd found that out about everybody and people willingly shared that data.
Absolutely. And Eddie, what sectors are leading the way in this space, and how do you feel insurance and financial planning compare to those leading sectors?
So I've mentioned some already. I've talked about banking and obviously recruitment.
We'll get there.
But another great example is buses. So Victoria Garcia is the ambassador for buses, and she's at Brighton doing the accessibility. And Brighton is a showcase for accessibility when it comes to buses. Simple things like having spaces on the buses for wheelchairs and prams, so that you don't have to throw a small child off a bus to get a wheelchair on. But the issue is that's a great example. I've talked about retail, where they have to accommodate everyone. Banking is similar as well, because you have the whole of society as customers. Whereas I think in our sector, certainly financial planning in particular, it tends to be wealthy people. If you have wealth, it's an amazing way of dealing with things, because you have the financial capability of dealing with that. If you don't have the wealth, what you need society to think about your requirements and make those adjustments, because you may or may not have the resources to do it yourself. So I think in terms of the sectors, there are so many great examples, and tourism is another one. The work that is happening in tourism has been brilliant. And the one example that has stuck in my mind is there's a certain type of toilet for people with wheelchairs where they've got beds that lift up and everything in the room. So these are big rooms that a lot of venues now have, and there's a campaign to get those changing places in as many places as possible. Now, if the Tower of London can do it, with all of the restrictions, all the limitations, then anything's possible. And that's the one thing that's really stuck in my mind. This is about attitude. This is about culture. This is about people wanting to do the right thing and actually getting on and doing it. And what Victoria Garcia has said around buses, and when she talks about it, it's about the senior leadership team buy-in. That makes the difference, because there's lots of really great people at lower level and management level, but if they are banging their head against a brick wall because the senior executives haven't bought into it, that's the enabler, and you'll see that in lots of organizations. It's transformational if you have a senior person who is responsible and actually is probably remunerated on the success of accessibility.
Yeah, and who gets it, Eddie? Who's prepared to sit in a room and say, I didn't know any of this before. I'm a senior leader and I'm humble enough to say, I don't know about this and I want to learn because I want to lead in it. And that to me is a really good, true, modern leader. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Leadership is fundamentally key. And we see that in the Lloyd's building. I mean, the Lloyd's building is, one of the most inaccessible buildings historically, but they've worked so hard to make it accessible, and their leadership status with disability confidence, and if they can do it, then it can be done in other buildings. And I stood at Dive-In. I did a disability confidence session at the Dive-In, the Lloyd's Insurance Dive-In Festival, about 2 or 3 years ago now. And throughout the gauntlet to the sector, that I'd just come off the construction site at Oldcombe and Broadwalk, the big HS2 construction site station, where they've put accessibility in. Their disability employment levels are increasing all the time. And if we can hire deaf people, visually impaired people with different impairments and requirements on a building site, I'm really struggling to understand why that can't happen in an underwriting room. Really struggling with that. So I sent them away to think about that. And the levels are going up, but the insurance sector, disability is one of the areas where there's more to be done. But there's tremendous intent and leadership, but there's more to be done.
You said, what are we good at in our sector? And I want to point out, where we have the Find Insurance service for BIBA, that's giving an opportunity for customers to find the right insurer, through the right broker. The work that GAIN do around autism is phenomenal. So there are lots of really, really good examples, and so I've spent that this last year unearthing them, wanting to amplify them, and wanting to share them so we can build better. So I'm really proud of what we're doing in our sector. But as Kate's highlighted, we have more to do. Other sectors have absolutely more to do.
But you are right, Eddie. There's an awful lot going on in the insurance sector that people can tap into. And the networks, the sector-wide networks are absolutely, they're some of the most proactive I've come across in any sector. So they're definitely worth people listening or hearing this to engage with, because they've got great examples. There was an immersive experience at Lloyd's only a couple of weeks ago for neurodivergence, actually immersing yourself in how that felt to be neurodivergent in the context of a corporate environment, which was hugely positive and very well received. So there are things you can get into all the time. There's lots of activity that's genuinely making a difference.
Which brings us on nicely to one more thing we must speak about, and I'm sure a lot of these organisations which you've mentioned will be involved in, Eddie, and that's the Disability Access Symposium, which is happening later this year. So something we're really excited about. Can you give our listeners an idea of what to expect from the event this autumn, and how people can sign up and get involved?
Absolutely. So first of all, I'm really pleased that the Chartered Insurance Institute have helped make this event happen. And the support that the team has given me has been phenomenal. It stems from when I took on the role, applied for the role. I thought I'd go on a website to go and find out what the ambassadors have been doing for the last 8 years since the program started, and I couldn't find anything. There were individual reports that people have done, but there was no sort of collective place where we could showcase the great work that the different ambassadors have done. So what I wanted to do was to sort of work with the Cabinet Office to try and showcase this great work. So we have a week, the Disability Access Symposium Week, which is the 5th of October through to the 9th of October, which is going to be a combination of virtual and in-person events. We have 2 key in-person events. The first one is on the 7th of October, and that's at the PwC offices in Embankment, and I'm really grateful for their support. And that will be a day where we're looking at what ambassadors have done and showcase different examples. Real focus on the ambassador role, but we also have Sir Charlie Mayfield opening up. We also have Sarah Weller, who is very well known with the work she's been doing on accessibility, and also is part of the committee that's leading on the Keep Britain Working report, as well as other sort of people from the different sectors. So that's about showcasing, sharing, and collaborating that day. The 8th, we have 2 hours at Lloyd's of London in the old library, where we're going to talk about the insurance sector specifically, and some examples for the insurance sector right in the heart of the insurance sector. But in addition to that, we'll have a whole series of pre-recorded webinars which we played throughout the week. For me, the key thing is this is not just about one day or 1 week. This is going to be a place where resources will be there for people to dip in and find what they need and connect people.
Amazing. Well, there's lots lined up and more to come as well. So we'll certainly include a link alongside this episode to encourage our viewers and listeners to sign up and certainly come along and as you say, engage with those kind of more long-term resources and guidance around the event as well. So all that remains is for me to thank you both for joining us on the podcast today. You're both such passionate advocates for the disability and access area, and it's just been really insightful speaking to you. There's so much to talk about. We could go on, I'm sure. But on top of that, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you both. So thank you for joining us on the podcast, and I'm sure our listeners will agree.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the PFP podcast. You can find out more about podcast episodes on the Personal Finance Professional website, many of which can be recorded as CPD. And as a reminder, do email us at podcasts@thepfs.org. That's podcasts plural at thepfs.org. We'd love to hear your questions and feedback. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, review, and subscribe. So until next time, thank you and goodbye. Welcome to the Journal podcast from the Chartered Insurance Institute, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of insurance and beyond. I'm Luke Holloway, editor of the Journal.
Okay. Today.
Yeah. Oh yeah, go on. From that before, yeah.
Okay.
Before we get into the episode, a quick note that we want to hear from you, our listeners. What questions would you like answered, and what would you like to hear more about? You can email us at podcasts@thecii.co.uk. That's podcasts plural @thecii.co.uk. Now here's my conversation with Eddie and Kate. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Journal podcast. You can find out more podcast episodes. Oh shit.
Well, not that bad.
I don't know why I'm saying you can find. Yeah, I'm just adding in a word. It's making it.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Journal Podcast. You can find more podcast episodes on the Journal website, many of which can be recorded as CPD. And as a quick reminder, please do email us at podcasts@thecii.co.uk. That's plural, podcasts@thecii.co.uk. We'd love to hear your questions and feedback. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, review and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Okay.